Okay, let's go ahead and get started. Welcome everyone, and thank you all for joining Aparo's Nonprofit Bites and Insights. We have an exciting topic today around mobile apps and whether it's something your nonprofit should be considering. We are recording this, so you will be receiving the recording as well as the PDF of the presentation deck after the webinar. My name is Yan Ting. I am Program Associate with Aparo. Quick shout out for those who are new to Aparo, welcome. Aparo is a nonprofit like you all. We provide services to other nonprofits to help meet their technology and business process needs so they can focus on amplifying their mission in the community. And one of these services that we provide are what we call Nonprofit Bites and Insights, which are workshops and webinars on various topics. And I have been looking forward for this topic. It's called To App or Not to App. So as everyone knows, in these times where it seems like there's an app for everything, it isn't surprising that more and more nonprofits have been coming to Aparo and just kind of asking about creating a mobile app for their organization. Specifically, is it a good idea? What are some questions we should be considering? How do we know it's the right time to do it? And of course, if we want to do it, how do we do it? So we have a speaker today who is here to provide us some of those answers. We have Darryl Moser. He is the CEO of MilkCrate. MilkCrate is an award-winning app that nonprofits can use to create affordable and easy to launch mobile apps. And I will be dropping the link into the chat so you guys can check it out. They're really excited for Darryl to come on. He is just a wealth of knowledge around nonprofit work, and we feel really grateful to have been able to connect with him recently. There will be a Q&A at the end, but please do feel free to drop in any questions in the chat at any time. And that is it for me. Darryl, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Yenting. And I'm really happy to be here to share with all of you some of the experience that I've seen, not just in the mobile app space, but in the technology and just communicating on a digital platform in the nonprofit space. So just a little background on me. I'm currently the CEO of MilkCrate, but my background started really as being a software developer. So I began programming and we ended up building a company for ticketing. That I ended up working in the nonprofit space, and I grew into more of a technology consultant. But over those years, I had spent 25 of them building integrations to Razor's Edge. We had many zoo and museum clients that were utilizing the data that was coming from our ticketing system to go into Razor's Edge. I then moved into the fundraising space and spent 6 years with Donor Perfect, and I'm currently still their partner solutions manager. So I ended up working with over 10,000 nonprofits in that space, trying to find add-on products that can really help them to boost their communication to their donors. But it was through that relationship that I ended up meeting the founder and CEO of MilkCrate. It was Morgan Berman. We had discussions about the connection between the program data that the MilkCrate mobile app was collecting and how we could end up putting that in front of the donors, whether they be grantees or the individual donors, corporate donors, and so forth, and how we could end up actually having a more impactful communication in that space. And as time went on, it grew into where I ended up moving into the leadership of MilkCrate, and it's been a really, really exciting time. The other thing that gives me a lot of perspective is I've served for 10 years as nonprofit board member in a variety of nonprofits, but most recently I am the executive vice president of a human services agency here in my hometown, just a little bit west of Philadelphia. I'm a husband and father of four, and if you ever want to chat about cycling, that's also one of my love to do things. But to dig into first starting with the idea of digital presence, many nonprofits, and I'm also a member of the Giving USA Giving Institute, which collects a bunch of statistics in terms of where is fundraising the most effective and so forth. And still direct mail is a very, very prominent form of doing fundraising. Here in the US, But clearly over the years, when I started with Donor Perfect, the online fundraising was maybe occupying about 6%. You have to allow for some of the major gifts that were coming in that end up skewing that, but it has been growing rapidly over the years. So digital presence is certainly here to stay. We know from the pandemic that we have had the need to be able to communicate in a digital way. And why do we need to do that? When we started out with creating websites, you needed to make people aware. Brand legitimacy was really key. If you were a new nonprofit, you needed to get it out there. If you were existing, you had new clients, new donors that were looking for your services on the web. And so it ended up pushing into digital. But the other thing about, what you communicate online ends up establishing your thought leadership. And your credibility as a nonprofit is very important. So making sure that you have open channels of meaningful information is really key. The other thing is how do your clients find you? In my human services agency, much of it is word of mouth, but there is a lot of people that are actually searching for nonprofit services, and they go to the digital sources to try and find them. We'll talk a little bit about sharing resources. How can you educate your clientele and so forth to be able to make use of the information that your nonprofit can help them either to get engaged, to help them to volunteer, to help them to donate. Illustrating your impact, we're going to talk a lot about that because collecting data for impact is becoming key. Gone, I hope, is the time where GuideStar is communicating the effectiveness of nonprofits based on the amount of their administrative budget. I think it really is about impact measurement. And we'll talk a little bit about how mobile apps end up being a really great solution for that. And lastly, donations, of course, they're what keeps your nonprofit alive, whether you're raising it through grants or other means. Those organizations, those individuals still need to know about what you're doing, and you need to have a facility for them to be able to make a donation. So digital presence channels, and again, as my background as a programmer, I saw some of this stuff evolve because the telling of my age, but the web was not even present when I began programming, and so all of this came about over time. But the other thing in serving the board of the nonprofit is I began to look to what are the critical technology components that a nonprofit at least needs to start with, even if they're the smallest. And the organization that I'm with is about $1.5 million budget. It's not large, but it's very mature. It was started in the 70s. So by the time I joined the board, there was already a website. There was a PayPal donation form. Facebook was just beginning, and they were starting to do some social posts. And they were using some occasional emails, but not through any kind of a marketing provider. And to me, as a communication channel in that day and age, those were the critical pieces. They were very necessary. They continue to use all three of those. And in working with all of the nonprofits at Donor Perfect, I see the same thing. Those are the core things that the nonprofit needs to have. But what we're finding now is that there are other channels that are opening up. And clearly the for-profit space is seeing some of this. People may become brand ambassadors, and they're ready to receive SMS and texting about whatever the topic or the product is that they're really interested in. And by the same token, nonprofits can explore that as well. The mobile app opens up yet another channel. I like to think of it as a very private channel, but it uses multiple technologies, almost blending a little bit of Facebook, email, and SMS texting all into one tool. But the clear thing that we've ended up communicating inside of my Donor Perfect circles is that communication needs to be multi-channel, because people have their individual preferences of how they want to receive and more importantly, respond to the information and the opportunities that they have. So as I mentioned, the website is really required. It's an entry level to digital presence. I've seen some organizations that have started with Facebook first. That can be okay, but I think you have to think about either where your clients or your donors are going to go and search either for your name or your services, and make sure that those are accessible. SEO is search engine optimization. You need to be able to be found by Google searches, Bing searches, whatever they may be. There's a lot of techniques for that, and I'm sure there's oodles of webinars that Aparo has already given that maybe talks about the key points to be successful in that area. The other thing that happens is donor acquisition. Now, to acquire a donor, they need to know to search for something that maybe you're providing. But by the same token, it could also be a client acquisition. Is they're in need of your services and they're looking for it. So the website is a really good way for them to go ahead and find that. And the key point is, and we can address this in some of our discussion, is no matter what you do on a mobile app, your website still needs to be mobile ready, because people are doing more and more searches every day on their mobile phone, and they get started with the education that you provide them on your website. Facebook, I'm going to say that it's mostly required. It's really dependent on your clientele. It's the first place that a lot of people look for where frequent content is. You could put a blog on your website. Newsletter versus Facebook post, which one gets more reads? It's really dependent on your clientele, on your audience. As I mentioned, Facebook might present some SEO challenges if you don't have the website. And the other social platforms, they are also key, but that really is dependent on your audience and what that audience typically pays attention to, or maybe even prefers. Just like we were talking about multi-channel, whether you do Twitter or Reddit or some other form of communication that's out there, you just may have to tailor it based on who your constituents are. Email, I mean, I think in this day and age, everybody would agree it's required. It's personally addressed communication. And the reason I say personal is because I'm not just making a global post to the world, I'm actually sending it to your email address. So that means I know something about you, and you must have given me your information because of the opt-in. It's the norm for many generations. I would encourage you all to follow a best practice that's evolving constantly to make sure that you can get your email through and use a reputable email marketing solution like Constant Contact or MailChimp or many of the others. SMS text optional. And I say it's optional because 5 years ago, we introduced a text platform at Donor Perfect, and it was interesting to a lot of folks, but now we're seeing it evolve, whether it's for events or for regular communications. The people that actually have a very personal attachment to the organization, they may be open to receiving SMS and text messages. Plus, this is also a generational thing. Somebody may have a barrier that says, I don't want to introduce businesses to my SMS. I just use it to communicate with my friends. Whereas the more recent generations will be more open to using that as a channel to communicate with different businesses that are out there. The mobile app, also optional. It's a fairly new channel for many organizations. And I think there's really some key requirements. It is a private channel of communication, much like SMS, and to some degree the way that email is, because the person has to individually download the app and they also register themselves. So you get the opportunity to basically opt them in, much like they would with text and email. But the key thing is you own the priority of the communication. You're not filling up their inbox, which has a lot of other communication that's in there. The app is all you. Now, there is the queuing of push notifications that there is some competition for inside of their mobile phone. And as always, an individual could choose to turn those off if it's not something that they want to hear. And this is one of the key points, is a determination as to whether or not a mobile app is for you. Do you have an audience and do you have the content that the loyal members of that audience want to hear? And if you do, then a mobile app in that private channel is a really great place to start communicating with them. We'll talk a little bit about the sectors in the nonprofit space, which ones end up responding really well to it. But that's one of the key things, at least if you're trying to communicate out, and I'm just going to use the verb engagement here. If you want to create, or if you want to engage them, I should say, this is a great place to be doing that. You can also use various media inside of the mobile app. You can create your own social posts. You can have person-to-person chat, and it also doesn't have transmit costs like SMS. We actually had a client that was coming on board with almost 1,000 clients that they were pushing out text messages to, and because of the per message costs, it was driving it up. But once you have the mobile app downloaded, you're just actually using your network and data fees, and it doesn't cost the organization as much. So challenges. Your posts can get lost. I am following the nonprofit that I serve, and it's rare that I end up seeing their posts inside of my Facebook feed. I mean, it's a different thing if you were, going through your Facebook feed and going through it for hours at a day, and you might end up encountering it, or if you individually want to look it up. But then at that point, is Facebook actually the service to your organization, or would they be better served if they just searched for your organization and went to your blog post? So 25 likes on a major announcement with 6,400 followers. Very, very typical at this point. Email, we talked about that, getting clogged in spam filters, open rates of less than 20%, and lower click-throughs. It can be very effective, but you just have to think about the type of message that you're giving them, and is that the right vehicle for you to get it out there? Texting, we talked a little bit about it. It may invade private channels, limited media options. You can certainly do some MMS things, and it can also be an expensive platform to be using. And mobile apps, I mean, to be fair, like many people may say, I've already got too many apps on my phone, and it also requires some added space on the phone as well. So those are some of the things that you'll need to consider as far as, who your target audience is and whether or not, they're going to be prone to use this particular channel over any of the others. Some recent data from Pew Research, and these stats are interesting because they've changed a lot even over the last 2 years in terms of smartphone adoption. You can see the green line there; it's continuing to grow. But what I found most interesting is the demographics over to the left. And so, cell phone versus smartphone is some new data that they're collecting. But even in some of the segments where perhaps senior citizens, and some of the marginalized communities that are out there from an income level and so forth, we are finding that the mobile phone is perhaps the most ubiquitous form of technology that could exist out there. And even if you're only seeing a 76% adoption rate inside of that, it still ends up being one of the highest forms versus being able to have a home computer or maybe visiting the library to be able to give them access to the digital presence that is out there. And I can speak a little bit about some of our clients who chose to implement a mobile app, on their devices for some of these communities, and have actually seen some great success in it. So the mobile app communication profile, and by that, I don't necessarily mean only the individual that's going to be receiving it, but the profile of your organization. So are you an organization that presents fresh and engaging content? If what you're communicating mostly about is maybe fundraising opportunities, do they come up 3 times a year? Or do you actually have a pretty open communication content that is coming in with, we were able to serve these needs, we're going to be doing a food drive, we maybe have this animal that's coming up for adoption. There's pieces of content that if you've got that kind of fresh and engaging content that is out there, the mobile app can be really, really great for you. Oftentimes the question comes up as to how often should we be posting updates, whether they be social posts or whether they be push notifications. And I think you've really got to have some activity that is on the border of weekly, maybe every 2 weeks, that kind of thing. The other key thing is make sure that when you're communicating, that any kind of push notification can actually be segmented. So inside of your mobile app, you should be able to address your volunteers maybe different than your donors. And those kinds of updates can go out more frequently based on the level of engagement. The other thing that we see is that the mobile app is really great for membership. It can actually be a perk. If you're a zoo or museum and you buy a membership, the mobile app can actually provide you with unique content that maybe won't be available through the other channels. And that's part of what ends up creating value for your members. And we're going to talk about something in the mobile app called a habit loop. We've all done it. We've downloaded a mobile app. We thought we were going to use it, and then we kind of left it dormant. And the dormancy could be caused for multiple reasons. One, maybe nobody invited me back. Maybe I got in there and I didn't see an opportunity to really engage. If it was just purely a news reader or something like that, I might be back every so often, but if I don't get the nudge or I don't have a motivation for it. So one of the things that we'll talk about is the gamification, to tie the gamification together with the fresh and engaging content. People like to achieve things. So if you've got a goal inside of the mobile app experience that they can accumulate points or maybe get recognized. We know this even from fundraising. When you do a monthly donor program, you actually want to give those monthly donors perhaps a label, give them a sense of belonging, let them know that they've accomplished something by joining that club. And the same thing is true with habit loops and being able to get your audience to respond. And that's the goal-focused audience. The other thing about mobile app is it's participatory and interactive. Now, an email can be too, so can SMS. You can ask questions, you can survey, you can give links to surveys, but the mobile app becomes all-inclusive. It is your program on their phone and access to everything, much the way that your website is. And perhaps they have a browser and they keep your website up, but the interactivity and the communication that you can have with a mobile app is a little better geared for the interactive communication that you might end up having. So audience considerations. We talked a little bit about generations of constituents, and clearly people would say that maybe the older generation has a lower adoption of those kinds of things. It is something to consider. And even in the more recent generations that are coming about, they may gravitate towards different social platforms as opposed to having a dedicated mobile app that's on their phone. But whether you're dealing with the programming side or the development side of your nonprofit, that also can be a clear factor, which is actually kind of the last bullet that I put on there as far as the volunteer donor participant. The other thing is think about sector. And this ties together with the discretion needs. If you've got content that you can communicate out at the public level, it can go out inside of the mobile app. But there are definitely some populations where, human services, people may not want to actually be highlighted. And you've got to be very careful with that content. You're probably thinking about that now as you're putting out Facebook posts. And that's a consideration that needs to be taken as to whether or not you've got content that can actually flow on a regular basis while still maintaining, excuse me, that discretion, as well as fundraising methods. Excuse me. Talking just a bit too much, maybe too fast. Fundraising methods, are you holding events? And in which case, you can use any of the forms of communication for events, but during the event, oftentimes SMS or a mobile app is going to be one of the more effective methods that you're using. But you can also have a donate button on almost any of the forms of communication that we've got out there. And you just have to make sure that those methods of communication tie with the methods that you're using today. We're not going to talk a whole lot about integration here, but there is the opportunity for your app to actually have a link to your existing fundraising method, so all of the data still flows back into your CRM. Now I wanted to sort of address the two sides of the nonprofit, and this is very clear to me because I see, inside of our human services nonprofit, we have a case management department and we have a development team. And while the two of them talk, they often operate very independently. And we end up finding that the digital communication methods that are employed in each of those departments can vary a lot. But at some point, we're going to talk a little bit about where is there some convergence that can end up happening there. So on the programming side, the areas that we see from a mobile app deployment is really in the volunteer space, where it becomes the easy way for people to go ahead and sign up for volunteer opportunities, managing their work efforts. And the other part of it is what do you use to keep your volunteers engaged? Inside of the nonprofit where I serve, we have over 500 volunteers that serve over the course of the year. While they could be getting, newsletters and so forth that are coming in via email, we also direct mail them out, but we could be actually deploying that in some of the mobile app solutions. And we've actually undertaken a project to communicate to some of our youth programs and to use the mobile app in that way. To communicate with both volunteers and some of the constituents that are out there. But the other side is also the client, the program participation. And this was actually what Morgan, our founder, was really most interested in is can the mobile app actually improve the outcome of your nonprofit, particularly in the human services area. And through content and gamification, we can help individuals to progress through whatever kind of education that gets them to the next level in your program. And we can talk a little bit more about that. But the other thing the mobile app provides is a convenient one-place stop to measure the outcomes. And I want to digress a little bit for outcomes versus outputs. At our food pantry, we've been measuring pounds of food for years. And that's been, the scale that we get at our board meetings and so forth. But what's really been a challenge is how do we actually figure out what an outcome would be? An outcome could be the number of people that we ended up providing food to and maybe bridging the gap. So the number of families is maybe more important than the number of pounds of food. However, I still think, we need to get to the higher level, which is, can we figure out how much is left to solve? How many people remain in our community that we haven't reached yet that are in need that we could fill their need? And once we bring that to zero, we could actually say that we've perhaps accomplished the food insecurity problem inside of our community. It takes a lot of work and it's not all about technology, but there are things that we need to do to measure that. I was recently on a webinar with an organization that provides baby care products in the community of San Francisco. And one of the stats that they ended up having was the decreased level of stress of the people that received their services. And 97% of their participants, they were polled, they were surveyed, and they gave the feedback. Now, some of that may be a no-brainer, but I think, if you're able to see that number move over the course of your delivery of services to the nonprofits, you can really get a good gauge as to whether or not you're having true impact in your community. And a mobile app is one way that you can actually deliver that in the hands of the parents of those infants and so forth that need services, and go ahead and poll them over time and see whether or not you're actually providing the services that they need. So the program participants and the tie to the mission, and how does the mobile app fit in? Are you getting enough communication to your participants? Are they reading their email? Are they getting SMS? Are you distributing content that can help them make it to the next level? Inside a mobile app, you can actually have an activity with a video, an image, maybe links to some other places that will give them additional content. But that content distribution, we do a mobile app for a self-help for high school students, which is about mindfulness, and it's had tremendous success because they keep pushing out new content to them to be able to get to that place, to be able to get to their outcome and their mission. And the other thing they end up doing is they survey them to see whether or not they're achieving the goal that they set out. And that's your mission. That's what it's really about. So aiding program outcomes and collecting data in the mobile app. I talked a little bit about that just a moment ago, about that organization that is serving the mobile app to high school students for mindfulness. It's a convenient way to distribute program content. Actually, I have a mobile app that's kind of scrolling here. This is for one of our senior organizations inside of the Philadelphia area. You can see that they've got upcoming events for the seniors. New users start here. Sown is really about teaching technology to seniors. And what a great fit, because they can download the mobile app, they can actually communicate with mentors that are inside of the program, and they can judge whether or not they're actually having a success in terms of the number of people that are using the mobile app. And you're actually engaging your audience for program success, because you're pushing out this new content. You're seeing photos of your friends, participants in the organization. And again, a lot of this came up as a result of the pandemic, is how did they keep engaging people inside of their program. On the other side of the nonprofit, we have development. You've got donor acquisition, engagement, and donor development. How does a mobile app end up helping in those areas? For one, I would say donor acquisition is not really the space that I would put a mobile app. People are not going to go to the Apple store or the Google store, and they're not going to say, I would like to figure out the mobile app for the Red Cross. I just don't think that's really where they're going to start. They may encounter a QR code that'll actually take them to a download of the mobile app. They may get an email about it where they announce it, but it's not typically where people are going to start from a donor acquisition space. It is a great vehicle that once they've got an interest, that somebody could download, and now you've got control over the communication that you're sending to them. It is a great tool for donor engagement. And as I said, that's how I got started with MilkCrate. I was looking for ways in which we could send out the messages to all of our fundraising people in the donor perfect world. And the MilkCrate solution was one way to collect that data from the program recipients. I actually have one MilkCrate client that said to me that they were able to take the reports right from their mobile app and put that right into their annual report that ended up going to board members and other people that are out there, because it was really good outcome data that was out there. And when you start talking to your donors about the increased outcomes that you have, you end up seeing development of those donors, because they end up raising their donations to a higher level. The other thing that I would talked a little bit about before was membership concepts, and it's a really good way to increase the value of the membership, as well as doing event engagement. There's a number of event-based apps that are purely in that space right now, and I think an app is a great idea for that. You download it, you pull it in, you've got your event scheduled for your conference. You can communicate with other members, and when the event's done, you could actually just remove it from your phone, and that's perfectly reasonable as well too. Also in development, you need to consider donor personas, and this is a step away from the technology that you're using, but really about communicating. I had attended an AFP conference where they actually tied the donor personas to a DISC profile, and DISC is really sort of like a Myers-Briggs. It's a personality type profile, but what we ended up finding in there is if you're going to go meet with a particular donor, you should sort of understand a little bit about what their tendencies are. Do they prefer the story versus the stats? How many times that I've seen the SPCA, the video, the Laura McLaughlin music and so forth, versus maybe all I wanted to see was the improvement that we saw in terms of the livelihood of animals as a result of that. Two very different profiles, but when you're communicating in the digital space, make sure that you've you're catering to both of those, or you have the ability to segment your donor. I talked a little bit about that we can actually communicate a push notification to different segments inside of the mobile app, and that's one way that you can try and get the right message to the person. The other side of development is you need to have the right communication, whether it's push notification, social post, or using the private channel. Try and find a way that your donors want to hear about it and can hear about it, and don't get clogged with some other information. So here's one place that they converge. And if you're in the healthcare space or hospitals, you may be familiar with the grateful patient concept, but we see it inside of the human services space where somebody may have been served by human service. They came out of the program, they became successful, and they became an advocate for the organization, they became a donor and so forth. So this is something to consider in terms of the digital communication. And even in the CRM space, we end up seeing clients, integrations with client systems together with donor systems. So keep this in mind. Some of the communication might be able to serve both communities when you're messaging out to both constituencies. So is an app right for your organization? I always like to start with needs or pain points that you might have. Are you getting consistent data? And I'm really talking about program outcomes at this point. Or are you collecting what we call an output, like the pounds of food? If you were to put a mobile app in the hands of your clients, would you be getting better data on outcome? Because they'd be able to give you their judgment. And trust me, the key here is asking the right questions and giving them a bit of an objective way to measure how they feel about it. We've all been through the 1 to 5 survey type questions, and that can work. And I'm not here, I'm going to say that as a technology consultant, you don't have to use a mobile app to do that. You could use SurveyMonkey if they respond to email and so forth. But one of the things that SurveyMonkey by itself doesn't do is it doesn't also push out another article that talks about nutritional eating, or how to manage certain money situations, or maybe workforce development education that's out there that is coupled with the survey that you send them inside of the mobile app. So that's where there's some convergence, is if you want to have that convergence and your clients respond to having one space for it, then a mobile app is a good fit. Clients disappear after the program. We've actually had a number of nonprofits that have come to us with that, and they feel that the mobile app is a good way for them to continue to engage even afterwards, because they can stay in touch with the program. Their email addresses change and so forth, but the mobile app can be a bit more consistent that way. If your Facebook posts are not getting attention, maybe that's a pain point. Or is the email going to spam? Are you finding lower read rates that are out there? Maybe it's time to open up a new channel of communication, such as mobile app. Who is your mobile app audience? Again, not constrained by age. Are your other channels of communication too full? Are your web searches or Facebook, are they getting lost? But here is the key thing that I want to say about the audience for a mobile app. Is there loyalty, or this next function, is there a critical function that the mobile app can serve inside of your organization? Volunteer sign up, event enrollment, those are all critical functions that they can serve, but then you can give those people the bonus of engagement articles. So we have a gleaning organization here in Eastern Pennsylvania, and in addition to all the volunteer opportunities to come out and harvest and pick food when it's available, they're also pushing out recipes, but these are going to the volunteers more than they are going to the individuals that are maybe on the other side of the food pantry that's out there. But as a volunteer, if I'm getting a quality recipe for things that I'm about to harvest this weekend, it's going to engage me, especially if I can think that I might be able to deliver the food to those in need. And that keeps me engaged in my volunteer efforts. So what do you have to say? Bit of a reiteration here. Is it fresh? Is it engaging? Is it educational? Can you gamify it? I'm not totally about doing leaderboards. I think that might work maybe in certain educational circles, but in today's day and age, I think personal accomplishment, being able to establish goals for an individual, is key. And I think that you should look for technology that's able to create that, as well as habit loops. What keeps them coming back? It's got to be some content, or it's got to be some sense of accomplishment that's going to keep them looping back and around. And then think about your cadence and the time to absorb and respond. Our attention spans have gotten so short. If you're sending an email out that is 1,000,000 miles long, please take one of those constant contact courses that'll tell you about how best them, because our attention span just isn't there to be able to do that anymore. We want bullets. We want to be able to drive down through the outline that you end up presenting. And that's the same thing that in any of these digital message forms that you should consider, and even in the mobile app, whether you're putting a social post out there or a push notification, try to keep it digestible content, or know that your audience is actually prepared for a novel or war and peace. So when are apps valuable? If you've got goals, value to users, value to staff, value to funders. I think I touched on a lot of these ways. Here's an example of a program that's got their dashboard on the back end so that they could see the users. This was a program to get kids involved in museums. We can see the museum visits by museum. We were actually geolocating the kids as they went into the museum so we could verify that they were actually there. But imagine a funder seeing this kind of data to say, you know what, I really want to make sure that the kids get exposed, or maybe marginalized populations are getting exposed to the museums in our Philadelphia community. This kind of data becomes very tangible and very motivating. So if you've decided that an app is right for your organization, there's a couple of different ways that you can go. Absolutely, there's custom development that is out there. There are software firms that can go ahead and build you one from scratch. You get a very personalized app that does exactly what you want it to do, but it also comes with a higher cost. Or you can go with an out-of-the-box templated app. That's kind of where MilkCrate operates. We have templates that are out there, but we can add customization if there's just an enhancement or two that you feel that might be necessary to engage your audience. So here's some breakdowns. You can typically spend 100 to 300,000 on a custom mobile app that's out there, versus if you're going to just stay with the stock template, it could be 10 to 30,000, with some annual fees or whatever to keep it operating and hosted and so forth. It can take 1 to 3 years to start with a custom app that is from scratch, versus we would typically launch our templated apps in 1 to 3 months. You do get a very specific solution for your needs. And there are definitely some cases where the investment time to put a totally custom app together is the right thing to do. If you find that you fit into what most nonprofits might end up feeling, either on the program side or on the fundraising side, you can use some of the features that are out there, and the best practices are going to be able to fulfill your needs. So here's a few features that we build in, and maybe this is about a third of the things that we do. There's an event calendar that's out there for people to download the app. They can get the push notifications that we talked about. As you can see, they pop up on your screen, even when your phone's, you're not currently logged into your phone. We can do check-ins by GPS, as I mentioned about those museum visits, polls and surveys. How often do you utilize local parks? Hardly ever, monthly, weekly. Those are some of the charts and activities that we can show. Segmented user groups. One of our clients' committee of 70 was using this so that they could communicate with those that want to get more educated about the voting process. And you can also share content and track participation, whether you're doing the social post, or you can also have your participants putting social posts out there, as well as person-to-person chats. So keep in mind what the user experience is going to be. We originally created a MilkCrate for Communities app where people could download an app called MilkCrate for Communities, and you would set up your experience inside of there that would have, they would have to be prompted to say, which nonprofit did you want to participate in? It's a perfectly viable means, but we started seeing a lot of our clients that actually wanted their own privately branded app. So Rolling Harvest is the gleaning organization that I mentioned. You can go to the app stores and find the Rolling Harvest app. It's tagged and labeled with their logo, and it's identifiable that way. It also gives the person a little bit more security because they know that they're actually pulling down an app from the organization that they want to support. So they download the app, they create a profile, which this is where you can end up asking a lot of key questions that you might use for segmentation later. For example, Rolling Harvest asks, what kind of vehicle do you have? Because when you come to pick up food inside of their gleaning organization, they may have to put a call out to anybody that has a pickup truck because of the tremendous amount of pounds of potatoes that they're going to be harvesting. And so that's where the segments can end up being key to segmenting out your communication. And the last part is the gamification pieces. So once you're in there and you're doing activities, you end up getting recognized either individually or on the leaderboards for what you're doing. Here's a few other examples of nonprofits that have used our mobile app. I think I've actually touched on a good portion of those. Reading Captains was really about that, making it easy for volunteers and communicate with each other while they end up assisting kids. We talked about the STAMP program, which is really the museums, and the We Vote program, which was to engage the voters in Philadelphia. So the last piece that I would talk about is just, like any other IT project, what do you need to be prepared for if you're going to launch a mobile app? I think you got a sense of some time frames before. The key thing is interview your audience. And maybe even before you consider going down the path of a mobile app, you might consider sending out a survey and to all your constituents to see whether or not they would enjoy having a mobile app or whether they would be more responsive to it. With things like that, you always got to take it with a grain of salt and remember, the Henry Ford thing, that if he had listened to what the people wanted, he would have built a faster horse. And technology is so much like that. But be mindful of it and consider it. But then also understand and maybe give them scenarios that a mobile app could make it better for them. So we start by interviewing you, and sometimes we end up going to your audience. We're going to be working on a nutritional app. And we went to the audience just to see how they would like some of the information arranged before we started building out that 1 to 3 month area. Prioritize the features that you want. A mobile app has to have enough to keep people leaving it on their phones, but you don't have to necessarily overload it. It's more about the content delivery than it is about making every feature accessible. So if you don't need a person-to-person chat inside your community, you can just leave that out. Then comes time for us to build the app, where we're working with you to configure the home, what we call the home screen. We're using your graphics and your images so that every one of our clients ends up getting a different experience, but at an affordable level because we're re-implementing some of the features that are out there. And then we actually walk the client through the launch on the Google and Apple app stores. It's rather interesting how these app stores have changed over the years. We actually have a 100-page process to go ahead and launch on the Google App Store, just because of all the checks and balances and questions that they ask about the app that we're about to launch for, this nonprofit, just making sure that it's secure, safe, does what it says it's going to do in the description and so forth. So after that process happens, it's available, then we assist you in advertising to your community. I think that the key thing that I would say, just a reminder, is people aren't going to find you on the App Store unless you tell them about it. So whether it's QR codes at your event, whether it's an email communication, the other thing about emails, it's not a once and done. Let it be a regular reminder that you can put out there. We've seen this happen with different mobile apps that have been out there tied to for-profit companies. Put an access on your website. We actually will help you build a landing page where people can find out about your app and then click a button to go ahead and load it onto their phone, as well as communicating it at events. So that said, I feel like we've covered a fair amount of ground, but if there's anything that you're interested in, by all means, feel free to put it either in the chat or the Q&A. So with that said, it looks like I might have a few messages here. All right, these were some housekeeping items that were put out there, but does anybody have any questions that I could answer at this time? Let's go ahead and put them in the Q&A or the chat. Yanting, I'm not sure if you were seeing come in.
Yeah, so we have a question. What are the associated maintenance costs?
Great question. Great question. So with MilkCrate, it's really about hosting and the number of users that you have in your app. So if you've got less than 1,000 users, typically the maintenance is about $350 a month, and then it scales based on how big your population is after that point. I think one of the questions that sometimes comes up, and just thinking about that, is a mobile app versus a mobile web app. And the difference is a mobile web app, you don't have to download it on your phone. What it's really doing is it's creating a mobile experience inside of a browser, which is a little bit of a step up from what I would say is a mobile-ready website. And by all means, a mobile web app can actually serve a lot of functionality. It doesn't have some of the offline capabilities that you might want or need, depending on what that might be. But if your technology provider can provide both, I would say it really depends on the speed and responsiveness and so forth, and maybe some of the user experience that ends up giving a more streamlined approach. but something to consider there. And Yanting, I think, did we get a question in through email or through the, I think you had mentioned it to me yesterday, but I wasn't sure what that was.
Yes. I'll pull it up.
And I see that one participant asked if the session would be available for reviewing. Yes, it will. So we will be able to share out the presentation deck. And I believe, will there be a link to a recording? Yanting?
Yes, we'll provide the link to the recording as well as the deck. Definitely the deck. There was a lot of great information there, so we want to be sure you guys have that.
Awesome. Awesome.
So the question was, should I really invest in an app when my website is not yet fully optimized for mobile?
Great question. If your website is not fully optimized for mobile, I think it's really more important to understand a little bit more about your users today. I would say if you've got that loyalty factor that is out there, I would consider the mobile app. But if you're still looking at maybe improving your SEO with your current website, making it mobile responsive then would be my first priority, unless you've already got that established population of people that would either be loyal in the program side of things, I'm sorry, loyal in the donor side of things, or you've got that functional need in the volunteer or program client side of things. If that makes sense.
Are you aware of any grants or funding streams that help nonprofits offset the cost of launching an app?
Yes, as a matter of fact, many of our clients are interested in the mobile app, and they will reach out to. I'm going to let out a little secret that I found in my Donor Perfect space of a tool called grantmakers.io. It is a website that has collected the data of those grants that have been filed electronically, so you won't get 100% of the grants, but it has some searching tools that are out there that allow you to find different foundations and grantees, either from your geographic area or your space, that you can use to source other grants. As a matter of fact, I just had a member of our team, grants typically roll off after a certain number of years, and I had a member of our team use grantmakers.io to put a search together and list out the most likely 10 grantees or foundations that could possibly help fund the continuation of the mobile app, because they were just having a great experience using it with their youth. Thanks, Ross. Yeah, know your audience. Thanks for putting that grantmakers.io in there. The other thing, and if you visit the MilkCrate.tech website and you wanted to maybe have more of a one-on-one discussion, we actually start with what we call a discovery call. If you wanted us to, meet with you and go through some of, what you're seeing as your audience, what your pain points are, we can have a very honest discussion as to whether or not we see that there's a fit in there, or maybe this is what it would look like. Do you think that that's something that your clients might find of value that's out there? I'd be curious. I didn't set up a poll. I don't know how many of our participants here are in the fundraising space, or are you actually in the programming space? If you want to go ahead and just pop that into the chat, I'd be kind of curious to see, what perspective you're actually coming to this webinar with. Both. Wonderful. Wow. All right. This could change my slide on the whole dichotomy. And an IT person. Excellent.
It's a good point, though. I feel like a lot of nonprofits that we work with, they're operating on a very small team, very small staff. So it's not uncommon that they're taking dual or even more roles. So that's a great question. With the mobile app, it's kind of almost like another thing to add on their plates. Does it take a lot of time to manage the app?
That is a perfect question, and something that I want to get into. And I want to sort of say that if the content is already created, right? If you've got educational pieces that you want to put in the hands of your program recipients, to put it into the mobile app is pretty easy. By the same token, if you're on the fundraising side of things and you're about to do a Facebook post, you can just jump into the admin and you can push it in there. I'd love if there was an API with Facebook, but we know they're a little bit restrictive on some of those things that I can't go ahead and read their post and go ahead and put it into the mobile app. But it's a pretty fast process of once you've got the image and the text that you're putting into your post to go ahead and put it into both channels. And keeping in mind that those are not exclusive channels. You're going to have clients that are going to prefer one channel over the other. And so putting in both places is really key. But what I would say is if you're an organization that is not doing those kinds of frequent posts on Facebook, or all of your content that you currently have is available in paper form, whether it's, I can show you the onboarding form or a client registration process that you can put inside the mobile app that is really a survey process. If all of that is paper, then some of the ramp time for us to get the mobile app up is really about the client putting in some of the data and getting that ramped up. And that's why our range of implementation tends to be the 1 to 3 months, because sometimes we encounter clients that data is not in a digital form yet. And so it would need to be put in that way. But definitely, I don't want to underestimate the effort. The launching of the app itself is something that we walk you through and do the majority of the effort, but the content is really still yours. So you just have to consider, what that would look like in terms of personnel and staffing requirements. Great question. And I guess maybe thinking from an IT person's perspective, it depends, saying IT, I've been at nonprofits where the IT people actually are the ones that they're responsible for content. They might be the ones that are doing Facebook posts and so forth. It depends on the size of the organization, or maybe you're just responsible for the infrastructure that's out there. I would say from the infrastructure standpoint, everything is really hosted by us. The mobile app is actually sitting on the phones of the individuals that are out there. We really do not see much load in the way of the structure being a burden to any of the technology staff and nonprofits. It just ends up being something that it's been very performant. Let's put it that way. We've been hosting on AWS now for a bit, and they've got a very resilient platform, and the technology is very fast as well. Any other questions that I can answer? Actually, I've got a curious one for the group here. Is there anybody that has used a mobile app inside of your nonprofit? Crickets. Okay. Museum. Okay. Interesting. Yeah, actually, and I'm going to assume Museum is perhaps one that might live in that membership space. One for fundraising. Kelly, I'm curious, the one for fundraising, was it for an event, or do you keep the mobile app and using it year round? Got it. Okay. Mobile cost for events. Okay, interesting. Yeah, a lot of the, and again, the two hats, my work inside of Donor Perfect, we end up seeing a lot of the fundraising tools that are out there are starting to build in some mobile apps. And that's one of the cool things. We can link out to the fundraising platforms or maybe the leaderboards from the fundraising and so forth. The thing that we've been focusing on is making sure that we've got some of those other content channels that are out there, as well as the gamification piece. But great to hear that some of you have been using them out there. Looking for something effective for text to give. I'd be curious, can you do push notifications inside your current app, Kelly? I actually thought Mobile Cause did have a texting portion. So I just, happy to happy to have you reach out on LinkedIn or just email me at MilkCrate if if you wanted to have a different discussion on that. Yeah, happy to share what I know. Again, my experience has really been in looking for any kind of technology solutions that are in the nonprofit space, period. Just because I was looking for partner products to Donor Perfect. So while I've certainly not encountered them all and they keep coming up with new ones, I'd be happy to chat with anyone if you want to email me on some of your technology questions there as well. Well,
Okay, yeah, I think we can wrap up here. Thank you so much for that really informative workshop. Learned a lot about mobile apps for sure. In the last couple of minutes, I do want to mention Darryl will be returning to our webinar in March. So it's actually going to be a little bit different. In March, we are doing a 3-part nonprofit Bites and Insights series around donor cultivation, stewardship, management. As Darryl mentioned, he is also business development manager for Donor Perfect. So we have invited him to speak more about that, to give us some more ideas and tips on how to enhance your donor management strategies. The second part of the series is we're going to have a donor panel discussion. So we're going to hear from local donors themselves on what attracts them to donate. So it's a great opportunity for you to ask those burning questions you've always wanted to ask donors and hear from them themselves. And then lastly, the third session will be, we're inviting donor management softwares to come demo, the vendors to come demo their software to see how they can support your donor processes. So feel free to join all 3 sessions for the full experience, or you can pick 1 or 2. Either way, you just only have to register once, and that should be opening up pretty soon. So be on the lookout for that. Okay, well, thank you, Darryl, again for doing this for us. It's been amazing. Can't wait for March. Thank you everyone else for joining us today. There will be a follow-up email. Please complete the post survey. All your feedback is, we take that into consideration and how to improve our programming. Also, if there's any topics you'd like us to cover, that's a great opportunity to do so as well. So thanks again, Darryl, and have a great rest of the day, everyone. Take care.
thank you, Yenting.